Indian hearts swell with pride as their brethren in the world's most advanced nation get frequently celebrated as a model minority. While Indians remain stuck in the third world, its citizens revel vicariously as their former compatriots or their progeny rise to leadership positions in business and politics in the first world nations. According to a United Nations report, the Indian diaspora is the largest in the world, estimated to be 32 million strong spread across over 30 countries, bringing India the highest share of global remittances. But the remittances are only a small part of the benefits India receives from its diaspora. Recently, their contributions in strengthening brand India abroad has been increasingly receiving attention. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has repeatedly called attention to the role that the diaspora will play in India's development process and in the promotion of its foreign policy goals. Even the de facto opposition leader Rahul Gandhi has labeled the diaspora as important on multiple occasions. But there is another side to this rosy story. Between 2000 and 2020, India's diaspora abroad grew by 10 million, faster than any other nation. In this, India was followed by Syria, Venezuela, China, and the Philippines, nations either in the grip of authoritarianism or undergoing economic collapse. Interestingly, over the same period, India experienced a pronounced decline in immigrants. What does this say about India's attractiveness to both insiders and outsiders? For many, this is a clear evidence of India's stagnating economy and lack of opportunities within its borders. They point to the fact that the biggest chunk of the Indian diaspora is not in Europe and North America, but in the Middle East. The vast majority of them are not running MNCs, but engaged as contract labor in construction and energy sectors. Even after decades of living there, neither they nor their children born there are entitled to any rights in those countries. Stories about their mistreatment often make it to global headlines. If anything, their presence there exposes to the world India's abject failure at generating employment for its young and skilled. It is also argued that the reliance on a successful diaspora in places like US and UK might be misplaced as their interests need not be aligned with India's priorities. For example, India has had problems with negative campaigning and foreign funding for separatist movements like the Khalistan movement in Canada. So, what is the right way to view India's diaspora? Do they represent an ever growing pool of citizens disillusioned with India, venturing far away from their homes in the hope of prosperity? Or are they champions of an emerging India spreading its soft power in their adopted countries? Today, we have a panel of speakers who have researched this subject at great length. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Binod Khadria, who's the president of Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, formerly the professor of economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, author of The Migration of Knowledge Workers, Second Generation Effect of India's Brain Drain, and co-editor of World Migration Report 2020. We have with us Dr. Anjali Sahai, who's Associate Professor of International Relations and Political Science at Gannon University, Pennsylvania. Her research focuses on topics relating to international relations and international migration. She's the author of Indian Diaspora in the United States, Brain Drain or Brain Gain. We have Dr. Amba Pandey, apologies, who's at the Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, School of International Studies at JNU, New Delhi. Her research focus has been on Indian diaspora and international migration. She's the author of the book, Women in Indian Diaspora. And we have with us Mr. Sanjeev Joshipura, who serves as Indiaspora's Executive Director since January 2018. Indiaspora is a non-profit organization and a network of global Indian origin leaders from diverse backgrounds and professions. He has been actively engaged in public policy, American politics, and global government relations. Welcome all of you to Argumentative Indians. To kickstart today's conversation, I would like to invite you, Binod, if I may call you by your first name. Um, I want to start off with the subject of brain drain, which had been the perception of migration for many, many decades until recently when people started sort of questioning that view. But we live in the age of technology where nations are competing with each other in cutting edge research and innovation. And it is this very sector in which India tends to be losing some of its best minds, future researchers, and inventors to advanced nations that offer enviable science and technology infrastructure and boundless career opportunities. What does this foretell for India's future? Sir, can I request you to unmute?
Yeah, thank you, Yajur. It's my privilege to be with this panel here, and I think this particular argumentative Indian topic today, which you call it India's vast diaspora, brain drain or national strength with a question mark. I think there could not have been a better time than this that you have chosen to pose this before the panelists and the audience that I guess are here to listen to us and also provide their own observations. I think what you have said about brain drain is probably the crux of the whole issue, but it is a subset. It is a subset of the entire topic in the sense that the vast Indian diaspora does not comprise only the highly skilled and qualified persons that you mentioned about the top end of the research and technological lead, but also a bigger diaspora, which does exist, Indian diaspora. It has a long history, starting from the colonial times. And so if we look at the construction of the Indian diaspora, you have mentioned that it's 32 million now. And the turn of the century, this was counted to be 20 million. Half of them are actually the PIOs, persons of Indian origin, and half are still Indian citizens. So this is a question mark even before the United Nations as to which one is the diaspora. So I would say diaspora has become a generic term now. And as you perceive, it also includes the students as future workers. So it is not limited to the Jewish diaspora without a homeland, or the British diaspora, or the Chinese diaspora, or the Indian diaspora in that sense, but a much larger canvas that we need to address. When it comes to distinguishing this diaspora, then we have to think of the old diaspora, old Indian diaspora, and the new diaspora. You know, the old Indian diaspora was basically the plantation-related, Fiji, Caribbean, and all those areas, including the West American and Canadian coast areas. But since we do not have time enough to go into those details, I would limit myself to the issue of the brain drain, which is basically the new diaspora, one part of the new diaspora. The second part of the new diaspora that you mentioned is the Gulf countries, in the Gulf countries. And they are certainly not the high-skilled, highly qualified, educated diaspora. So we have a very narrow, subset of the entire diaspora. And I would say out of the 32 million diaspora, that would be not even 1/3, because many of the diaspora in that we would expect in the developed global north would comprise families. The families will in that sense not be the principal workers, which are actually considered to be the brain drain. So I think we have come a long way from Hargobind Khurana's time, because he is considered the symbol of India's brain drain when he did not get a clerk's job in Chandigarh, and finally got the Nobel Prize in medicine in the United States after having naturalized himself to the American citizenship. So I think there are wheels within wheels in this particular subject, where we need to look at the pros and cons of both. Whether brain gain is the flip side of the brain gain, or is it an alternative? Because as I understand, brain gain used to be the flip side of the brain drain of the origin countries, brain gain of the destination countries, But over time, it's a political economic game. It's not as benign as we think. It is an agenda, and through which the migration, which is a very sensitive issue, is for the first time that the multilateral negotiation has been brought to the table of the multilateral negotiations in 2018 with JCM. And it took Kofi Annan 16 years to do that. So I would leave it at that and would listen to my fellow panelists on what they have to say. You have to unmute.
Yes. We'll go to Dr. Sahai next. But continuing with the same thing, so Binod emphasized that yes, there is this concern, but in the overall diaspora, it's a very, very small percentage of these high skilled workers. And I think it's a very small percentage of any population in general. But still, in actual numbers, it's a large number. According to a report in 2016, Indian immigrants and Indian origin scientists make up the largest group of foreign workers in the science and technology sector of the United States, nearing 1 million people. So these 1 million potential researchers and scientists could have advanced Indian science and research and innovation, but that's not going to happen. The countries which are already far ahead of India in these areas are going to get further ahead through the talent and efforts of these Indians. So I invite you, Dr. Sahai, to share your opinion on this matter.
Good morning. Morning here. Please call me Anjali Yajur. I'd like to quickly introduce myself, just one more addition to the work I do here. I'm also Commissioner on Governor Wolf's Advisory Commission for Asian Pacific American Affairs. And I mention that because there are references to some of the work we are doing and some of the connections with brain drain. So I want to start with agreeing with Binod that the diaspora is, we have a very narrow definition of the term diaspora. It includes persons of Indian origin, it includes non-resident Indians, it includes the student population. And also we are looking at a generational difference between those that migrated in the 1970s and the 2000s and the next generation of Indo-Americans in the United States. Most of my work has been looking at the Indian diaspora in the United States, and I would like to talk about the diversity that exists in American society because of the various groups that come here. The Indian diaspora, as we know, has grown and increased in size, scale, income, education, and now it is very politically visible compared to how it was previously. The term that is often used is the Samosa Caucus has returned. It is a reference to some of the highest lawmakers who have been people who have been elected to the House of Representatives and have considerable influence. There are various names here that we know, for example, Congressman Ro Khanna. And one of the most influential person of Indian origin is a Vice President, Kamla Harris. Now, whether and how she is going to be influential in any matters of concern to India is yet to be seen. But it is not lost in the Indian diaspora the soft power that this particular group has. If we look at in terms of numbers, again, I just want to say that in terms of voting power, while we say that the Indo-American community in the United States is about 4 million strong or 4.2 million strong and still counting, it is only 1.4 million who are actually naturalized citizens and 1.2 who are born in the United States. The rest are not US citizens. So the voting power is something also that we need to consider when we talk about how much can they influence any policies in favor of India. So going to the heart of the matter, which is brain drain, or is the diaspora drained? Was it a drain on the country with people moving out, with the best and the brightest moving out? It's an age-old discussion that needs to be contextualized in today's, in what's happening today. I would like to argue that, when we count, of course, the gains can be counted through remittances, which was actually very strong. In the pandemic year as well, it was actually all-time high of $82 billion to India. we can count, we can quantify some of these gains. Later on in the discussion, maybe we can discuss, how are those who are coming out not a drain on the country, which I think is a start. When we talk about what is the prospect for students in India today and why and how they see more prospects outside, and eventually the return migration and other ways in which they can contribute to the home country. So I want to maybe stop here and discuss, with other questions, or we can, talk about other things. But that's mainly what I wanted to say right now.
Thank you, Anjali. I'll go to Sanjeev next. So Anjali brought up like how Indians have had some spectacular rise in the politics of the United States. We've also seen Indian people of Indian origin taking up positions of national leader in Ireland, in Portugal. But and there is a lot of hope that some of these people going up the political ladder in many of these countries could help India's lobbying efforts there. But if they are in politics, by definition, they would be citizens of those countries. And often interests of India will not be aligned with those of their adopted homes. Can we count on these people who are citizens of, let's say, United States or Europe to serve Indian interests? Is that a reasonable assumption or expectation?
Well, Yajur, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, and delighted to be on with such distinguished panelists. Like you have mentioned, and like the previous speakers have mentioned, this is a nuanced topic with multiple different dimensions to it that doesn't lend itself to easy binary characterization. Like most things in life, there's so much gray and not just black and white, right? But in the guise of the argumentative Indian, if one is forced to take a binary position, then I would categorically say that, to steal from Anjali's work before, that overall the diaspora represents a brain gain, not a brain drain. And there are various reasons why I say this. Knowing fully well that we are talking about disparate strata of diaspora in different countries, in different professions, and different points in the socioeconomic ladder. Keeping all of that context in mind, right? To answer your question directly, Yajur, before I make just 2 or 3 quick points, it is absolutely correct that when you are a governmental representative of another country, you are first and foremost advocating for the interests of that particular country, and that is as it should be, right? One wouldn't expect anything different. But the point is that it is not just a matter of pride for India that several of their diaspora are in, very senior positions in politics or government or so on and so forth, like you mentioned, in these different countries. But it's also actually the glue. The diaspora, I would argue, is the glue that binds these countries together in their geopolitical ties, and through economics and commerce as well, right? I mean, governments come and go, political parties change power, change hands, but one thing that remains consistent and constant is the underpinning of the diaspora between these countries, which is why I mentioned that it's a lasting group. That's my first point. My second point is that, and I think you referred to this, Yajur, in your opening remarks. I think perhaps Anjali referred to it as well, but I view the diaspora as the biggest export, the biggest possible export in terms of India's soft power. Because let's keep in mind that a country's sort of place in the rostrum of nations in the world is not just dictated by its economic prowess, its military assets, its geopolitical relationships, and so on and so forth, all of which are important, but also by its soft power. In fact, on a day-to-day basis, the cultural hold that a country has in the minds and the imaginations of people in other countries is what dictates their perception of that country. You don't go around thinking every day of how many submarines India has, but you do look at the neighborhood Indian restaurant. You do look at the Indian art scene in these various other countries, right? So that is a very important dimension that the Indian diaspora brings to the relationship between India and these other countries. which enhances India's image. The last thing that I will say is, in your opening, you mentioned that, or you asked the question that does the diaspora represent some kind of disillusionment with India? And is that the reason that they went abroad? Now, without commenting on any specific case, I mean, there are, as Binod said, there are, more than probably 32 million diaspora, depends on how you count them, and what you define as diaspora around the world. And, different people respond to different polls, and different people have different reasons for doing what they do. Obviously, one can't comment on individual cases, but in general, based on a Carnegie Endowment survey that was conducted in 2020, it's quite clear that there is really no disillusionment among the Indian diaspora with India. In fact, quite the contrary. The Indian diaspora is looking to collaborate with, or learn from, or in some cases help India, as appropriate. And that most diaspora find themselves deeply connected to India. So I'll just stop there. And I know there's a lot to unpack, a lot to discuss based on what you sort of said in your opening framing, Yajur. I hope that we can get into that as part of our discussion over the next hour.
Thanks, Sanjeev. And with this, we'll move on to Dr. Pandey. So Sanjeev brought up the matter of soft power. And obviously that's extremely important. But I want to point out there's been a change in the reasons why some of the people were leaving India back in the day and now. Back in the day, people quoted as better economic prospects to be one of the most important reasons for them to leave India and go far away. But now what seems to be the change, I think there's some studies which have shown this, that among the millennials and Gen Z, it is actually the culture and the lifestyle of the Western world that they are attracted to. Many of the people, when they have surveyed, their response is that they're attracted to the liberty, the freedom to live the way you want to live in Western countries, which is why they want to go study abroad and get jobs abroad. So with people who are getting attracted to a Western culture, can we expect them to go there and become champions of Indian culture? Sort of spread the soft power?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It is really a great pleasure to have, to sharing a platform with such a distinguished panel. Let me start from a very basic thing. Am I clear? Is my voice clear to you?
Yes.
Perfectly, ma'am. You're perfectly
okay. Okay. So let me start from a very basic thing. And I would say that, the ideal condition for any country would be to consume its best of talent for its own benefit and for the benefit of its people. That actually should be the ideal condition. But actually, it is almost utopian for any third world country, especially, and especially for a country like India, where we have a huge population. But at one point, we know that just after independence, the best of our talents was migrating. It came later to our notice that, okay, we can use that talent. But at that point, we were losing them, the best of them, And, but, in Latin American countries, it is said that, brain, it's not brain drain, that it also means that brain goes into the drain. So thank God that did not happen to us. Now the question is that in this transnational connectivity, we came out with this whole new scenario where very easily we are using this, our talent for the benefit of the home country also. And we should also remember that no matter, even if they are getting attracted by the Western way of living and, the facilities, the good life which they get there, still they remain connected to India somehow or the other. And the context of soft power is very visible from there, from that aspect, that even if they are attracted to the Western world, they still remain connected to India. And the benefits of diaspora engagement actually are not so confined to this and that or this. It's a very, very diverse way of engagement. There are very diverse ways of avenues of engagement. So even if they go there and settle there, I think they are in several ways connected and are benefiting India. And I think if you see the IT industry in India, the growth of IT industry, I can point out that it is one of the best examples of how even when the diaspora got attracted by the Western world, they still managed to do a huge favor for their home country in terms of the growth of Indian IT industry. The second point I also would like to point out that you had asked if they become politically active in their host countries. So can we actually expect them to be for the motherland? Here I always point out one example. I bring out one example, and that is of Mauritius. If you see basically Mauritius has remained under the Indian-dominated country, in the sense of the government, also the prime ministers, presidents, everyone has been, and I think it has really helped India to emerge as one of the very strong powers in Indian Ocean. And it's a very good example of diaspora going beyond soft power. It is almost a hard power benefit that India has got in its relations with Mauritius. So that is also one aspect that, apart from the soft power, IT industry, other economic benefits, remittances, I think that is also one aspect that one has to look into. Yeah.
May I?
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. Yes, please.
May I?
I could not hear.
Yes, please, Binod. Yes, please, Binod. Please go ahead.
If Amba has finished, then I think it's very interesting that both all of them, Anjali and Sanjeev and Amba, has mentioned about the focused on the benefits side of the diaspora, starting with the political, with a question mark whether the people on the high positions in the political arena, whether actually they would be giving their thoughts to the country of origin of the diaspora or not. That's a question mark. But remittances was one of the issues, and that I think is the way we look at gains. We look at gains in three kinds. One is the remittances, the money, then transfer of technology in terms of embodied technology, knowledge, and then of course, the brain gain actually came wrapped up in the discourse of return migration, of people coming back. But you see, there were wheels within wheels in all of these, and I think we need to connect this not only in isolation, but also with the policy of the destination countries. The national pride that we have began with a kind of a national shame. When Hargobind Khurana and others were leaving, they were called traitors. They were called deserters of the motherland. And that's what Amba had mentioned, that, right at the time of the independence, what was the, brain drain position. That was because Nehru at that point in time had chosen to be non-aligned, to make India a non-aligned country, and not satisfied the aspirations of the old diaspora who were looking forward to India's independence and that India would take, their cause. That did not happen. That was a big disappointment for the diaspora, but that policy continued even Indira Gandhi's time. It was in 1977 that we saw the turning point when the Janta government came to power. They started shaking hands with the diaspora. All those considerations that were mentioned, that diasporas, can be funding extremist activities and separatist movement and so on, those are part and parcel of all these things, it is a question of more or less. Is it the dominant character or is it not the dominant character? So even there, we have to understand, look at benefits in terms of their degree, not in terms of kind. Remittances have the flip side. Are the remittances making us derive the benefits of those remittances, or they are going into conspicuous consumption? Kerala is the state which receives the maximum portion of the remittances, but where is it going? It's going into construction of flashy houses, or even dowries and things like that, or perpetuation of the migration that give them literacy. It's the highest literacy rate state in India, but not higher education, so that being literate they can go to the Gulf and bring in more remittances. So it's a vicious cycle rather than a virtuous cycle. If we look at remittance, then we look at the technology, the soft power that we are talking about. Do we have the reins in our hands? We don't have the copyrights, we don't have the patents. We look at the IPR and other things. The technology that comes to India, we have to worry whether we'll be disconnected in between this, panel discussion, because the electricity might fail or the network might, give in. So why this India, if India is a soft power leader in terms of IT, its home is not in order? Why is that so? And then India buys that technology at heavy royalty. It's like, frying fish in fish's oil, that kind of a thing it is. And the return migration, who is returning? The old and the aged and the people who are chucked out. You remember the 9/11 actually drove people, but before that it was Y2K. Y2K scare made people come back or turn into naturalization of the American. We are talking mainly focused on the United States because that is the most primary destination now, but we need not lose focus on other countries, other destinations that have come up. Post 9/11, it was Australia, it was Europe, continental Europe. They started English language, universities and so on. So all we have to look in the dynamic context of the changing discourse, changing, that 1977 turning point that I mentioned. After that, what happened? Even you mentioned, Rajiv Gandhi's, son here, Rahul Gandhi. But Rajiv Gandhi himself supported this, this diaspora is a national strength. And what did he call it? He said it's not brain drain, it's brain bank. That was the term he gave, that anytime we are in crisis, we can turn to the diaspora and that would help us. And when you mentioned Modi, it was Modi's predecessor, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who actually was the kingpin in the high-level committee report that came out at the turn of the century, was actually Vajpayee's own doing. And all that we see about the diaspora turning around, Pravasi Bharatiya Divas and this and that, or rather than calling them traitors and deserters, calling them as angels, or saviors, that has been the doing of the new government at that point in time. And that was the environment which changed, because it came not only with the old classification of the high skills like doctors, engineers, nurses, accountants, and so on, but a generic skill of IT, which was actually employed in all categories. You need IT skills, IT knowledge in medicine, in engineering. That's why we have STEM today. We have STEM professions and STEM students. And today we see that these developed countries, they're not even after our professionals. They have moved from that. They want our students because they are the future. They are the future workers. And how that happens, that is happening if you look at the age profile of the students, that's coming down. Started with postdoctoral, because that's where, when our IITs were established, the IITs were established to support the second 5-year plan. Heavy industry, 6 or 7 IITs, later on 7, first 6 IITs were set up. But when the graduates came out from IIT, there were no jobs. They were selling soaps. That was the term that was being used. So what happened? That became a gateway to NASA. NASA grabbed them and gave them further education. And in its Sputnik race with Russia, it soared. And so IIT became a brand for India's middle class. 175,000 students appear annually. And you know the industry, the coaching industry that thrives on that, only for 3,000 seats. And 25 to 30% of the IIT graduates are not in India, and they are the best and the brightest, not only in quantitative terms, but this is DST study, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India study. If you look at doctors, All India Institute of Medical Science, why was it established? For national strength. But 56% of the Indian doctors passing out from All India Institute are not in the batch. So there is a conflict between individual and society. Nobody can point out a finger, ki aapko nahi jana chahiye, you should not go. Don't send your children. Why should they not go? They have their aspirations. They should be in the best place. But what happens? So there is a micro-macro divide. The individuals need to excel, but will the country also excel? So we have to be innovative. That's where I would leave it. You are muted.
Thanks, I've done it. Thank you. Thanks, Binod. I'll come to you, Amba, next. But so Binod has brought up the important point of remittances. He's actually questioned if the benefit of remittances may be exaggerated. One needs to examine how they are spent to understand their true effect. I want to just dive a little bit. I want to sort of like continue on the topic of remittances a little bit more, because studies show that like remittances are temporary. When people go to these advanced nations, they tend to send a lot of money back home. But once they start their own family there, then they stop sending these payments. Once you are all set up there, you start making your investments, you buy a house, etc., whatever, in your adopted country. So what I want to highlight is that remittances are only temporary, but the loss is permanent. The hundreds of thousands of IITs who India spends its scarce resources on in skill development, or actually, like Binod pointed out, in first finding scouting, this examination where 175,000 students take and only 3,000 are selected. So that's the cream de la cream of India. On that, then the limited resources of the Indian state are spent, and then they are going abroad. But the remittances may only be there for a few years. That they don't sort of continue for much longer. Okay, please, Amba, go ahead. You wanted to make a point, and if you could also address this point.
I wanted to say what Sir said, Professor Khadria. For me, Sir, he's a very senior, to me. That's what I was saying, Sir, that brain drain also means that it has not gone into the drain. So I mean, at one point, it was a loss. At the time India became independent, or some years after that. But if you see the development of IT industry, they were the people who were actually training the Indian professionals, even when the government of India was not even aware that there is something like this which is developing, in the Indian diaspora. So that's what I said, that even if they go there, for better opportunity or for the Western, attraction of that Western lifestyle and things like that, there is something or the other which is spontaneously we can gain. But I have just 2 points to make. One, that is the talent migrating out of this. That is the cause of concern, which I think in India is not the case anymore. A lot of talent is being consumed in India also. So that is a big concern. Is it migrating out of this? Because migration otherwise is a very natural process. People do migrate wherever they find better opportunities. But it should be choice between the mother country or the going out. It should not be that there's nothing available, so I'm going. One is this. The other point which I wanted to make was that, later on I can add. It just slipped out of my mind. Yeah, thank you.
Can I jump in?
I want to bring in Sanjeev. Let me get in Sanjeev first. He wanted to make a point. Sanjeev, Amba has brought up the important point that, like, first of all, obviously, the inflow of ideas from the West is facilitated by diaspora. That's well taken. But she also made a point that natural flow of people across borders, it's a very natural thing that some people would always want to go and try or explore opportunities outside. And even some developed nations, for example, Britain is a source of large population of migrants. There's a huge emigration from Britain, but then usually it is also complemented by immigration into Britain. We don't have that. We're only a source of migrants outside. India is not attracting any outside, not even from poor countries, surprisingly. Why is that?
Yajur, I will respond to your question directly, but I will also then go back to something that both Binod and Amba said, which I'd like to reinforce because I'm in agreement with both of them. By the way, both Binod's and Amba's comments, and I'm sure something that Anjali will probably chime in on later, only reinforces the fact that this is such a nuanced topic, and there are so many different multiple angles to it. So I'll get to that in a second, but let me address your direct question, Yajur. If India wants to utilize inbound immigration as a metric to determine its sort of attractiveness, its success in bringing people from the outside, balancing emigration versus immigration, as you indicated, if that is a metric that India wants to utilize in evaluating its own success as an attractive destination, then I think India should look at not only its immigration laws, but its processes, its infrastructure, its education, disparities among various states in India. So that is a very complicated matter that I think goes into dimensions that are perhaps beyond the purview of a panel that is able to discuss it, because there are decisions that have to be made at a governmental level and so on and so forth, right? But in reinforcing what Binod and Amba have just said, one point is in regards to the natural flow, the natural mobility of talent to where the opportunities lie. I mean, that's just the way the world works, right? As the previous speakers have already mentioned. One thing I would say there is that India is also today in some areas the beneficiary of that pattern. And what I mean by that, I'll just give you one very conspicuous example, right? And this is replicated across different fields, but I'll give you one conspicuous example to bring home my point. So India, as we know, is today the granddaddy and grandma of global cricket, right? And the IPL is probably about 33% of the global cricket economy, the Indian Premier League, the cricket tournament that's played in India. Now, we know for a fact that there are several players from foreign countries that participate in the Indian Premier League, often at the expense of national duty towards their own country's cricket team. So my point here is very simple. India is the beneficiary of that as well, not just losing. But the other point, the allied point I'd make, is that those players who come to India to play the Indian Premier League then eventually do go back to their own countries and play for their countries in certain tournaments and so on and so forth, or certain test series and so forth. And the skills that they've gained in the IPL enhance their own country's cricketing prowess. The same, I would argue, is true for India in terms of its emigrants abroad, right? So they go abroad, they get skills, they contribute to that economy of their adopted country, but that does not mean that they don't contribute to India. It's not mutually exclusive, is my point, right? That's the first point I'd make. The second and last point I'd make is in regards to, I think in your opening framing, Yajur, you had mentioned that does the sort of outbound immigration from India and the lack of inbound immigration into India, does that indicate a lack of opportunity? Does that indicate a stagnating economy? I would actually question that premise. I think from my vantage point sitting here and working at this global leaders diaspora organization, which is spread across various different countries, I would actually argue that based on what I see, India today offers more economic opportunity than it ever has in the past. Now, granted that there are still, there is a lot of disparity among economic strata in India. All of those things are true, which is true anywhere else in the world as well. But overall, as a nation, India today offers more economic opportunity than it did in the past. And in fact, the diaspora is not just contributing to that economic opportunity, but is also taking advantage of that by way of investments, by way of commercial collaborations, and so on and so forth. And I would also argue that India is no longer losing their best minds in technology to foreign countries. Look at the number of unicorns sprouting up in India. India is the envy of the world right now. In terms of, when I say unicorns, I mean startup companies with $1 billion valuations in the capital markets, right? India is the envy of the world at this point in time. And there are so many collaborations happening in the technology sector between these startup CEOs in India and not just investors abroad, but also strategic advisors abroad, partners up and down the value chain, upstream and downstream. There are just so many collaborations that happen at an organic level that, it's quite clear that the diaspora abroad has a key role to play in the success of the Indian economy in the tech sector. That's all I have to say for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Anjali wants to make a point, but and after that, Binod as well. So I'll shut up for now and I'll let Anjali go ahead quickly.
Thank you. My mind has been racing. A lot of very, very important points made by my colleagues on this panel. Let me, if I can, I would like to talk a little bit about immigrant voices. I want to bring it down to the human level and talk about the migrant experience a little bit, because that is a very underlooked factor, in a lot of, or maybe we are looking at this now a lot more than we did before. So one thing I want to start with saying is that, the whole brain drain thing started out where the best and the brightest are leaving after receiving their education in India and then, not, giving back to India. First of all, I'd like to point out that a lot of students who migrate, particularly, or even those who move for work, receive their training or higher education in their new countries of adoption or their new host countries. And so when we talk about the resources put into developing a person's individual skills and qualifications, is not just limited to the home country. So, somebody may come out of undergraduation and then receive their graduate degrees in UK, Sweden, Australia, United States, so on and so forth. And so it's not just frozen in time. There is levels and stages in an immigrant's life. And I also want to point out this myth or this notion of immigrants having a very rosy life in their new countries. It seems that the affluence and so on kind of takes center stage. But we have to understand that not everyone is a CEO, not everyone is making six-figure salaries. In fact, if you look at a lot of immigrant issues in their new countries, people are stuck in their jobs because they don't have, they're waiting for their current companies to sponsor their visa and they're waiting for their green cards to arrive. People are stuck in the same jobs for over 10 years or 12 years, just trying to make two ends meet for their family that they have created in their new adopted countries. So it's not a very, it's not without its own struggles. And assimilation and trying to fit into a new country with a culture that's different, but trying to find that nice medium where you are assimilating but also hanging on to your culture. So I just want to point out some of these things, that it's not all hunky-dory. I know a lot of people did benefit, so I'm not downplaying that part, but there's a lot of struggle for immigrants, even in United States and other developed countries. People are just their issues are different. So when you ask how are they helping their homeland, I think you have to understand that a diaspora interest is multifold, as has come out. One is, of course, issues that are of interest to the home country. We have to understand that some of their issues and lobbying concerns is about issues that affect them in their new countries. So, for example, getting just the speeding up their visa process, or making sure their children can go to colleges, paying in-state tuition and not out. So these are some of the issues that actually concern them. So I'll stop here. I just wanted to, those are the two top things that came to my mind. I just wanted to throw it back there for us to discuss on this more. Thank you.
We'll go to Binod next. He wanted to respond
Okay,
to Sanjeev.
I think this
But
debate is
before,
becoming.
I
Yeah,
just wanted
yeah.
to make Binod. I just
Yeah,
want to make
Yajur,
one
you
quick
want to say
observation
something, Yajur? You want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make one quick observation to what Anjali said. Anjali,
Yes.
you mentioned like migrants need to undergo a lot of struggles, whether it is for visa issues or economic issues when they are living there, when they're building up their life in their adopted home. But the fact that they continue with these struggles, wait 12, 18 years to get their green cards, etc., is still there because they value the quality of life and the living standard that that adopted home is offering them. So clearly, there is a rosy lifestyle there, which is attractive enough to even undergo all that struggle. Just wanted to bring that up, but let's go to Vinod, please.
Yeah, it's not as simple as that, Yajur, but I think the debate is becoming interesting. Anjali made 2 points. One about the students, further education. And just because that country has invested, that itself is a question mark. Who pays for that education? It is the parents who pay. 65% of the overseas students' funding of education comes from the parents. The host country pays about 25%, and the remaining comes from third sources. If you look at Open Doors, the annual publication of IIE, you will see that classification. So that, despite this, let me be the devil's advocate here and say that suppose I have invested in that, does it give me the right of ownership? It's like, sitting in a rented place and saying, I have developed this, I have painted this, and I have, maintained this, and it becomes my property. It's a human capital. It's a stealing of the human capital. And actually, it is actually exploitation. It's inequality. Because you are stuck, because these people cannot come back to the, underdeveloped world. I'm using an obsolete term of underdeveloped world. It's not even called that anymore. But that is the style. That is the style of living. This is the quality of life there, that you still compromise or putting up with the difficulties that you are mentioning. That, I think, is the crux of the diaspora policy or so-called migration, international migration policy. Nobody touches visas. Nobody touch visa issues, even in multilateral negotiations. It's a hot potato. That's why all these other things, on the sidelines, they will be discussing about other issues, but assimilation, integration, language issues, but not visas. Now, where is the problem? Now, the problem is that visa policy changes overnight without a warning. Nobody knows when it is going to change. But people's investment in education, in career choice, is a long-term process. It's a non-reversible process. I want to be a doctor because United Kingdom wants me, or Canada wants me, or Australia wants me. So that takes me 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. It's non-reversible. I cannot change course over midway. But these policies change overnight. In fact, UK had that change of policy overnight. 300 Indian doctors were stuck there. And it was the UK courts which came to their rescue. And then there was a tussle between the court and the Home Office. So these are the issues which need to be understood, that this is not unilateralism, which it should be. I should say that I would rather vouch for unilateralism. Multilateralism is nobody's baby. It's not a level playing field. Global South is completely cornered into isolation, and it is the global North which works there. Now, why this is so? Because the visas are becoming, this is because temporization, permanent settlement, nobody wants. Why such a long queue for green cards and then naturalization? Because they want to have a turnover of younger migrants, so that the migrants, when they become older, it's time for them to go home, and the new migrants come with new skills, with a. So I call it the trinity of dynamic conflict: age, wage, and vintage. If they are younger, then first of all, their aging population is neutralized at the macro level. All the global North countries are aging, whether it's Germany, whether it's Japan, whether it is other countries. You see the tendency is to have younger migrants. So you have a turnover. You don't allow them to settle down. So once you have them, you have the wage benefit, because once you have younger workers, you give a golden handshake to the older workers, tell them to go home, and you have lower wages because they are younger, no perks and no pension because they are temporary. So PPP, lower pay, lower perk, lower pension, no pension. That actually makes sense. If I'm an investor, I would like to have my workforce younger, temporary, and no pension, because that would reduce my cost of production of a pair of shoes, and I will sell it in the international market at a competitive price. That gives them the advantage. That is how India loses its edge in international trade vis-a-vis the countries which are actually using Indian labor to produce those same commodities. We need to understand we need to have the data. Data is a big challenge in migration, and data we don't collect. Data are all available in immigration countries because we don't control immigration. And finally, students. Why students? Why? Because students, it's the vintage of students that carry the latest technologies, and changing technology. You and I, for my generation, I can't even manage my smartphone, but I have to depend on my young daughter to, see how the software can be managed. So that is why you find that students, there are 4 times the student fairs, education fairs take place in these developing countries. And what they call them? They call them, and again, Anjali, 65% of that cost still goes from the pocket of the parents. They will give 10% of the fellowships and rest is all window dressing. So what happens? What happens is that ultimately these students, they go there and 60 to 80% of them don't come back because they don't get used to that life. So you find that this is actually a big train robbery of skills, of the future skills that one has to understand. Look at the age profile, as I said. Now it's coming down to baccalaureate level. And what is the curriculum of that baccalaureate? It is not for the development, not suited to the development of this country. It is suited to a global curriculum, which would be, most appropriate for the destination country. So we need to understand this political economy aspects of this. And that's why I say it cannot be done in isolation. It has to be at multilateral negotiations, but I have no faith in multilateral negotiations. I have myself seen at the United Nations how it happens. And so it has to be bilateral. And if not bilateral, it has to be even unilateral. A country must have the courage. We are the largest exporter of human capital. Okay, we will put our foot down. These are our terms and conditions. You have to give. There were attempts. Jagdish Bhagwati proposal of taxing the brain drain in 1977. It didn't work out. So why it does not work out and then we give up? We have to be innovative. And we have to understand that it is an era of globalization. We cannot go back to the Soviet Russian era of having exit visas, whereby we stop people from going. Still there are countries there are conscription. So unless you serve in the army for 2 years, you cannot go out, but those times are gone. So we have to have a very innovative policy whereby those skills, talents which are globally in short supply, they have to be shared. How that can be done? It can be done. And I'm telling you that in the post-COVID era or COVID era, what is going to be at the forefront are the doctors and the nurses and the health workers. Even now, the travel restrictions are not imposed on them. They are allowed to come in national interest of those countries. I have changed my flight ticket 5 times. In last 1 year, I'm stuck here. I want to go and meet my daughter in the US. But some people say, you apply to the US embassy, say that you are going in national interest of USA. I said, I am now retired. What national interest am I going to serve there? If I had I been a doctor or nurse,
you brought a very good point on the old versus young thing. I think that's very important, and we often don't think about it. Many countries incentivize our young to spend their youth years there, and more than 50% of the migrants actually go to the Middle East, where no matter they work through most of their productive life, but they earn no rights to citizenship in those countries. So then they come back to India, and it's India that has the burden of these aged people. Whereas the fruits of their youth, the labor of their youth is all spent in those countries. Even if you look at Singapore, which encourages Indian students to come and study, it is conditional on spending some of their best years, the youth years, in Singapore towards the development of the Singaporean economy.
Yeah.
So we do say that. Anjali, are you wanting to make a point?
I just wanted to give a quick rejoinder or maybe a little bit of reply. I guess when I was referring to how much United States government invests in an individual's education, I was mostly referring to the population that came here on scholarships and worked in the United States. And I guess I'm referring to people of my generation who came here about 20 years ago. A lot of people actually did come on scholarships, did not take a single rupee from parents, and kind of work their way out here with whatever money the US government gave them. I know we haven't gotten into this, but I would quickly like to also talk about role of women in their lot as immigrants. And this is something that I definitely wanted to talk about very quickly. That in the things that I brought out earlier, immigrants who feel they're stuck, I think women are particularly vulnerable because a lot of women, usually, not always, are on dependent visas and come here as spouses, and a lot of them are very educated and having degrees in India and so on, but they are not able to work in the United States because of their dependent visa. And we saw how this was something that was given by executive orders. They could work under the Obama administration, that was rescinded under the Trump administration. And now President Biden is going to try and do work on that again because it takes more time and consensus through the Congress. Then executive orders is the way to go. But those are temporary. They can't last. I mean, it's from one president to the other. So I just wanted to point out, I know we have experts here who can talk more about the role of women, but I just wanted to say.
Yeah, who are the pressure groups? That is the point. Who can be the pressure groups to, impinge on the Congress that, you revert that and not the Trump era HB4 visa should be revived. Fortunately, it was not revoked at all. So that's before we run out of time, you will give me one chance to address Sanjeev's point, and maybe I can come at the later point.
I want to bring up an audience question here at this juncture. Okay. We have a question from somebody called Narender Thakur. How do we see the role of one faction of Indian diaspora in religious activities and fundamentalism, like the attack on academic seminar in Canada yesterday? And then there's a similar question from another audience member saying, how do you see the engagement of separatist movements such as Khalistan movement by the Indian diaspora? So I think this is one of the criticisms that diaspora's interests are not always politically aligned with what Indian national interests. And we have seen support from diaspora, and at least that has been the accusation that diaspora from advanced countries have supported secessionist movements in India. I don't know if anybody here wants to take up this question.
Okay, I can.
Sanjeev, you want?
Yeah, Sanjeev.
Let Sanjeev go first.
Yeah, Sanjeev go first.
Well, I guess the only thing I will say is that yes, it is true. I mean, there is demonstrated evidence that there has been some support for secessionist movements within India from the diaspora abroad or sections thereof. I don't want to generalize here. It might be very small sections actually, but there is that evidence. I don't think that is deniable. My only point, my rejoinder to this, and my reply to the questioner in this regard would be that it's not as if that is being originated, that the secessionist movement is being originated by the diaspora. Is it that there is an absence of secessionist movements in India that is then being fomented by the diaspora? Absolutely not. There are indeed, as we know, secessionist movements within India that are active in different parts of the country. And yes, it's true by virtue of the fact that the diaspora comprises of people from various states within India with different political opinions, that a small fraction of them might support these movements. Mm-hmm. That is a fact. But that doesn't mean that the diaspora is responsible for fomenting secessionist movements.
Yeah.
But the diaspora has the funding power, the monetary strength to take a small movement into a very big political force. They do have the resources, the technology, the connections, and the funding to do that. Yes, go ahead, Binod.
Yeah, I think I agree with Sanjeev that it is a reflection of what happens back home. Here in India, that is reflected in that sub-diaspora group, which can be taking up those kinds. And the kind of thing that Narender Thakur my former student and my colleague now, has raised a very important point about the attack in Canada. See, those sporadic things can happen, but they do not characterize the diaspora as such. That the diaspora association has to come up and condemn those things. They have to say that this is not acceptable, like the Black Lives Matter. That kind of movement has to be there to nip them in the bud and not allow them. Why Khalistan movement that time happened? That was separatist movement in Khalistan. Why Pakistan, Punjab only? I come from Assam, the Northeast. Northeast always had this problem for the last, from 1980 it had started. And when I was visiting Fulbright, visiting professor at Boston University in 1995, I attempted their annual convention of ANA, Assam Association of North America. And to my, amazement, I found that they sang the national anthem of United States of America and then the national song of Assam. And they skipped the national anthem of India. So and I was amazed because I was a guest. I just kept silent and wanted to see what is happening. And one of their own senior members stood up and he said, "Where is our national anthem?" And then without batting an eyelid, he said, "We will sing." And the entire audience sang that song. So that is what is needed. There may be, sporadic, this kind of things, and there can be elements which are actually, not knowing what to do and getting excited by the things that are happening around the corner. So that is very important, but that's so far as answering the question. I would like to take up Sanjeev's very important point in terms of the allegory that he gave about the IPL and the cricket and the sporting skills. Sporting skills are very much important, of course, for the raising our spirits, and particularly in times of COVID, such depression, or only perhaps sports and music and other things, the cultural activities can perhaps revive us. But at the same time, I would like to think back and see what is happening to my home country, the poor. What is happening to the have-nots, those who cannot get 2 meals a day? What is happening to the migrants who have lost their job, the migrants who have been subjected to the wage theft? What is happening? Those who have come back from the Gulf countries without their remittances, without their wages being paid. What is happening? In fact, next week only there is a presentation of a report on that, and I'm part of that. I'm happy to share that with you people. But I would like to say we have to understand the data. And the data, I'm giving you the data of the World Competitiveness Report. Indian diaspora is the model minority, you say, Diajur. And if you look at their educational profile, look at their income profile, look at their occupation profile, they are at the top of the Asian communities. Better than Japanese, better than Filipinos, better than Chinese, and so on. So if we look at them as the model minority, earning almost $100,000 now, what is the average productivity in India of that person's brother or sister or anybody? The World Competitiveness Report, I'm giving you slightly dated data of 2013. At that point in time, it was 4 purchasing power parity dollar per employed person per hour in India. That was my contribution, average contribution to my GDP. And in United States, it was $80. Same Indian.
So I want to continue this conversation, but I want to bring back. We haven't finished the conversation on the secessionist movement. I think Dr. Pandey wanted to make a point earlier on that. Okay. So I do want to just Dr. Pandey, there is a view out there that the Khalistan movement, for example, would have faded away in India ages ago had it not gotten constant support from the wealthy diaspora based in UK and Canada. So what is please go ahead. Let's get your review on this.
Yeah, well, actually, I had jotted down some points from all the conversations before, but let me address this first and then I will go to another one. You're talking about Khalistan. You just compare the Sri Lankan case and you will realize that the role of diaspora, I mean, it was managing the whole this Tamilela movement, you know. So we also have those examples. It is there. We just cannot deny, you know. And at the theoretical level, there is a big debate. Empirical level, there is a big debate on how people who have migrated and people who are remaining behind, are they actually part of the same group? Because in case of Sri Lanka, it was realized that people who were in Sri Lanka wanted to get rid of this movement because they were suffering directly. On the other hand, the diaspora, which was actually sitting in Western countries, they just were supplying money because they were themselves not suffering. So this is also one, you know, aspect of diaspora engagement with the homeland, and we cannot deny it. You know, diasporas are as political, as casteist, as classist as we are. You know, they are part of us. So something happens here, and that they extend. You know, and it is, yes, it is a very good empirical study in case of Sri Lanka, that since the diasporas are not suffering themselves of the situation that prevails in a secessionist movement, they actually tend to become careless about the sufferings of the people and want the movement to continue. It was a big debate in case of Sri Lanka. So sometimes we do see this. This is one aspect. I mean, like, you know, the remittances. I mean, there are some aspects of remittances which we would not like to see in our society. In case, if you see Punjab case, I think, you know, a lot of drug abuse that is happening is because of the remittance money. So that is also one aspect. It is never in black and white that we can put forward something that this is good. I mean, there is always in case of remittances, the first thing which actually struck everyone, okay, what is so great about remittances, that for the first time, we realized that the huge amount of money was actually for the first time was coming from the developed world to the developing world, which was not the case before that. At the time of colonialism, the whole money was going from the developing to the developed world. It was through remittances that we realized, okay, the money from there is coming to us. But I would certainly like to add bring one point, that, you know, the government role is very, very important here. And whether in case of remittances, the channelizing the resources, whether it is philanthropy, whether it is remittances towards a constructive use, is very, very important. And unless and until the government looks into this aspect, a lot of money is going to get wasted. You know, it is. If you see the philanthropic aspect of diaspora, we have not discussed till now, it is a huge contribution that the diaspora is making whenever there are natural calamities, or you go to small villages, small districts, where the diaspora, the people who have migrated, are contributing. But it is not showing the kind of results that we would expect it to show, because the government does not have any particular policy to channelize those resources. You know, here I think it is very important for the government to look into the matter. And one more point that I wanted to bring in here is about, you know, it's a bit of theoretical point, that one aspect of the talent, the migration of talent, or the talent drain, is of the distress migration, you know, whether it is migrating out of distress or out of choice, you know, better. And please remember that the talent is best utilized not by stagnating in one place, you know. It is always, if there is a circulation, the minds, the knowledge, it grows, you know, and it's always good, always good. But the second point is that whether the home country has the capacity to refill the talent pool. That's very important. In African countries, if you see, you know, there are very few doctors, and they migrate. And the countries, the home countries, do not have the kind of infrastructure that we have. I mean, we are producing engineers, doctors, and who CAs and whatnot, MBAs, in huge chunks every year. Some of them are very good. And also now the best of talent is not migrating. If you see, the best are consumed into IITs, IIMs, and things like that, and rest migrate, So we are producing this kind of talent every year. So we are refilling our pool, and that is how this whole circulation going, coming, and all that is very relevant. And it's also very, it can be very beneficial in India's context, especially. That's what I want.
And I would like to.
Thank you. No, Binod, I'm going to go ahead with Sanjeev. But Sanjeev, when I know you need to respond to some of the previous points, but I want to introduce a new question here. So flipping the point about some of the diaspora interfering with Indian politics by, for example, by supporting secessionist movements, I want to flip that question around. And I want to ask, why don't Indian diaspora use their privilege of being in places where they have immense liberty to speak their mind, freedom of speech? Why don't they use it more to criticize what they see as wrong or unjust in India going on? Something where perhaps the citizens of India, while they are there, they're too scared to say because it may affect their interests. They don't have the same kind of liberty that somebody based in the UK or US enjoys. Why don't they use? We see the Chinese diaspora use their liberty to often criticize the Chinese government whenever there is something unjust. But this phenomena has not so far been observed with Indian diaspora in any meaningful way. Is there a reason for that? Yes, please.
I'll respond to your question directly, Yajur, and then I'll just make 2 points. I would actually argue with the premise that the Chinese diaspora has been more vocal than the Indian diaspora in criticizing their home government. Yes, it's true there have been instances of that, but it is also equally true that the level of interference that China has in terms of utilizing its diaspora abroad at various universities and so on and so forth as a tool, as an arm of the Chinese government, or at least Chinese state-sponsored interests, is much higher than what India does in that regard.
Yeah.
Right? So actually, I would argue that the Indian diaspora living abroad is more vocal on both sides of, in terms of, supporting what they see as the Indian government doing right, or in other cases, opposing what they see as the Indian government doing wrong. I would argue the Indian diaspora is more vocal on both sides than a lot of other diaspora. You take one example of this recent conference, very controversial, that was held, called Dismantling Hinduism, right? Now, that is obviously an extremely hot button topic. And there were people who were speaking their minds freely on that subject. A lot of them, most of them were Indian diaspora. Now, equally, I know that there were people who are part of the Indian diaspora, who were vehemently against the premise of that conference. And they spoke out vehemently as well, right? So there is a raging dialogue and debate going on within the Indian diaspora about issues in India. So, that's just one point I'll make. But the couple of points that I wanted to make of my own were, one is the framing of this discussion, which, by the way, I think has been an extremely thought-provoking discussion, thanks to you, Yajur, and thanks to my fellow panelists. One of the sort of elements of the framing has been that the migration, the outbound emigration of talented minds from India to other countries is a loss for India, right? Now, previous speakers have emphasized that that's sort of the way of the world, the way the world works. It's not, the point of debate is not whether you should have left India or not. The point of discussion should be how best India can harness the talents of those countries, right? I would take that point one step further. Let's look at within India. Binod mentioned the pandemic, which I'm very glad he brought that up. One of the biggest issues in India during the pandemic, as we all know, was the migration of labor from villages to cities and then back to villages because their jobs in the cities were lost, that kind of thing. So my point there is that it's human nature to go where opportunities lie. Even within India, you see migration from the villages to the large cities for economic opportunity. It's not just a matter of Indians going outside India, right? It's just a human concept. So that's just one point I want to make. The second point I want to make is again related to the pandemic, but also bringing in what Amba said, which is a very important point about philanthropy. You know, the organization where I work in Diaspora, we are extremely involved in global diaspora philanthropy. We've released several lists in the recent past of top Indian diaspora in business, in government, in philanthropy. You know, there are 200 Indian diaspora in very senior positions in government in 15 countries. There are 65 CEOs of Indian origin at Fortune 500 or Forbes 2000 companies. But also just limiting myself purely to philanthropy for now. And by the way, none of this is to say, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that, you know, while there is a very sort of economically advanced class of Indian diaspora, there is also another category of Indian diaspora who is not doing that well. I'm not disputing any of that. I'm agreeing with that. But sticking to the philanthropic point narrowly alone, which is a very important point that Amba has made, during the pandemic, during the first wave of COVID in India, and then the second wave of COVID earlier this year, the Indian diaspora stepped up tremendously to help India. So much so that even Kamla Harris, in one of her speeches, mentioned the Indian diaspora as a source of great strength and great pride for the relations between the two countries by way of how much they're helping India in this time of need. Tens and hundreds of millions of dollars without any exaggeration. And I have some numbers to back that up. Tens of millions of dollars by individual organizations, but hundreds of millions of dollars collectively have been raised by the Indian diaspora to funnel towards India during the second wave of COVID. That's just one example of crisis. There have been plenty of other examples, the Latur earthquake before that. Also on an ongoing basis, when there is no crisis, the work that is being done in villages, in rural school districts, for education, for women's empowerment, for sanitation, for healthcare, that is being funded by the Indian diaspora for the benefit of India, is really yeoman service. And at in Diaspora, I have the privilege, really, the honor of interacting with so many of these leading Indians who are doing this kind of work from various countries to help India. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks. I know Anjali wanted to comment earlier on the audience question. We'll get Anjali. And Anjali, while you are there is also another interesting question which you may want to answer from Shashi Kusuma. Is there some kind of embarrassment among the diaspora to address issues about larger issues about India when they're in? So there are a lot of movements around there, around medical associations, Telugu movements, language movements, visa issues, blah, blah, blah. But like there seems to be some level of hesitance to sort of be an open, outright advocate for India or overall national Indian interest. Is that something that you agree with? And what do you think there could be the reasons for that?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that when I previously wanted to talk about was basically what Sanjeev brought up. The Help Breathe India is the same thing I wanted to say in the his company and sources. What I was going to say, I think the Indian diaspora raised over $1 million in 48 hours. So that just says something for how the diaspora is very much linked to their homeland. But to address this other question that came from the audience, I think this has come up before in this panel discussion today. It's not like the diaspora is hesitant to address larger issues concerning India. It goes back to the diversity of the diaspora itself. The diaspora is not one. The diaspora is not the same generation. They have different issues of concern, and you have different viewpoints within the diaspora itself. So how they address certain things is completely up to how they view the current government in India, the previous government in India, and they align themselves accordingly. So I don't think there is a lack of a national policy towards India. I just think it's broken down, as you said, in philanthropy, in fundraising or just remittances for the homes. I mean, there's limitations to what they can do. They have often raised their voices. I want to maybe cite with just one example. The India caucus, worked very hard to get, to lobby for the Indo-US nuclear deal that went through. That would have helped India, in the energy sector. So I think they raise their voices where it's needed. But I think, you have to address the diversity in the diaspora itself.
Thank you. Taking from something that Sanjeev said earlier, so I want to bring up the issue of sort of going forward, right? So move the conversation to more like from what needs to be done as opposed to sort of analyzing more why things are the way they are. So inaugurating the Pravasi Bharatiya Kendra in New Delhi, Prime Minister Modi had said, brain drain worries can be converted into brain gain if we see the Indian diaspora as a strength rather than counting them just as numbers. So my final question for today's session to all of you is, what would it take to convert the brain drain to brain gain? And we'll start with Binod, and then we'll go through all the panels. Just keep it brief because we're nearing towards time.
Yeah, you are nearing the time, so I won't take more than a minute to share my views on this, which I've been holding for many years now. I think to turn brain drain into real brain gain, we need to think in terms of all the resources that can come back, whether it is remittances, whether it is knowledge or technology, or whether it is the people coming back, whether permanently or temporarily. This has to be focused on raising the average productivity of the Indian people, the average Indian, which is $4 purchasing power parity at the moment per hour as compared to $80 in the United States. That can happen, provided all these resources are not going into short-term corporate sector profit-making industry serving activities, but long-term sustainable objectives of education and health. These are the only two important factors which determine our productivity, average productivity. If I am not literate enough or not educated enough, no matter where I go, I will not be successful. If I do not feel good, if my feel good factor is very low because my health is not in good status, I will not be able to deliver. So that's where I think the brain gain element of brain gain could be. So I will say, speak the language of economics, that there is a necessary condition and there is a sufficient condition. There is a necessary condition is that the diaspora has to be globally present, and that is there. 32 million diaspora, or including the highly skilled, are all over the world. But the gains from that back to the country has to be there. That is the sufficient condition. But that, unfortunately, is not there to call it a national strength yet. That's where I would leave it.
Thank you, Amba. With your concluding remarks on the final question.
I would just want to say that, I think it's very important for us to understand the diversities that exist within our diaspora. I think by understanding that diversity, we will be able to engage with each group that is there, whether it is the indentured diaspora or the the modern US highly educated, or the Gulf, semi-skilled, unskilled workers. It is the understanding the diversity that the government can engage with all these groups, and to come out with specific policies, specific programs, that is presented before the diaspora. For example, one small thing, that if we take up one district, and supposing the government wants to renovate all the schools, it should come out with a very definite project before the diaspora, And that's what I was saying. All that money that is pouring in can be channelized, and something very, constructive can be done. just one aspect, there are so many things that can be engaged with, that can be utilized in a win-win condition. That is very important, in a win-win way. We should not always expect that, okay, they will come and they will do great for us. It is actually always a win-win thing that the government should come out with, or the non-governmental bodies.
And
Anjali, yes. Please go
I'd
ahead,
like
Anjali.
to say that in addition to everything that was said by Binod and Amba, to focus just maybe narrowly a little bit on the Indians in the United States, one thing I would say for the Indian diaspora in the United States is what's different from the past is they were fairly invisible as a community, and this diaspora is now very visible, very politically active, and has lawmakers and from within the Indian diaspora. So I think to channelize this effort to convert their soft power into actual policies that might impact either Indo-US relations or development for India, whatever it is, I think it is time for now that they are visible and you can see the close links between entrepreneurs and lawmakers and diaspora organizations. They need to work together to channelize all the resources and power into something more concrete for both themselves and for India. Thank you.
Then Sanjeev, what would be your view on what does India need to do to better tap its diaspora?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I know we are close to the end of time, but I have two things to say. One is my perspective is that it's true that, as previous speakers have mentioned, that in the mid 60s and mid 70s, let's say, the outgoing talent from India to the Western world was indeed a brain drain for India. But my perspective is that over time, already that has increasingly more so become a brain gain for India. We are not, I agree with Binod when he says that we are not at the point yet where we can fully or have fully harnessed the potential of the diaspora for India's development. I agree that there is a ways to go, but I already see the paradigm changing in that it is no longer a brain drain, it is becoming a brain drain. By virtue of collaborations in technology, by virtue of philanthropy, business, academics, culture, cuisine, the arts, whatever you can think of, science, academia, all of those things. That's one thing. The second thing I'll just say is, I'll kind of emphasize what Anjali has been saying. Anjali was talking about the US-India context, where the Indian diaspora here is ascending to positions of political power. I don't only mean by being in Congress, but in addition to that, I mean by being on political campaigns, by fundraising for campaigns, by forming lobby groups, so on and so forth. When there was this point about America sending vaccines to India recently, there was a bit of a delay for about 3 or 4 days before President Biden made the decision and the announcement that the vaccines will be sent to India. I know for a fact, because I witnessed this firsthand, that the Indian diaspora was extremely closely responsible. In fact, I would argue the primary source of responsibility in terms of advocating at the very, very highest levels of the White House that this is something that should be done in the interest of closer alignment between the two countries. There is, in fact, a Politico article. Politico is a reputed political magazine here in America, nonpartisan, that talks about this. Also, the same is replicated across Australia and the UK, just to take two other examples. Australia's Look West economic strategy, Asia economic strategy now, focuses extremely heavily on India and the Indian diaspora in Australia as a glue to link India and Australia commercially. Also look at post-Brexit Britain. After Brexit, one of the areas that the UK is looking to cement trade deals is India. And part of the reason for that is the ascension of the Indian diaspora in UK's politics. So that just emphasizes my initial point that I made at the very start of this conversation, that governments come and go, dispensations politically come and go in all countries, but the diaspora is the underpinning, the glue that really links these countries together longer term, for the benefit of everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Anji. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And that brings me to the conclusion of the session. Thanks for sharing your insights and your views, which helped us in examining so many different dimensions of this vast and complex subject. Thank you. And I hope that you will join us again on Argumentative Indians. Namaskar.